Nau mai, haere mai. I'm Caitlin from the UN Galleries team, and I'm really excited to be here to sort of have a nice little conversation with Emma Ormsby, who has put together this wonderful show that's been on here for the last week or so, Kaitiaki o Te Wai. Emma, if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, for sure. So, ko Emma Ormsby from Ngāti Reo ko Ngāti Whārau oku iwi. Yeah, so I'm in my fourth year of study. This was all work that I did with Simon and Grimsley at the back for my summer scholarship project. I guess I started off looking at this, this video here is of lake care, which was a lake that was quite important to me growing up. It was a lake that I'd go with my friends, we'd jump into it, we'd kind of have yarns there. It was a very kind of pivotal spot. But I was thinking of a location that kind of epitomized my high school, early high school. The lake would kind of be it. So I wanted to start from there and find out ways that we could house its water quality, because the lake is kind of known for being a little bit putty, being a little dirty its waters. So I was trying to find ways that we could help boost the quality of the water in an artistic way, by using artistic methods, engineering, science, kind of blending a lot of different things. The first thing I kind of came across was biochar, which is what you can see on the board here. And it's one of those filtering methods. But as I looked more into the ways that we can filter the water, I found out about kaakahi, which are freshwater mussel shells, which I didn't actually realise existed until I started this project, which was crazy because they're a really important taonga for both Māori as the objects in themselves, but also for the water quality for both lakes and rivers. So as I kind of discovered more about them, I realised the lake had these mussel beds that all since died out. They have remnants of the beds, but they're no longer standing in that lake. And then I found out through Simon about this river that's really close to where I live. It's like a 5-minute walk. It's where I kind of walked during lockdown, so it's that other kind of connection. Had living kaakahi. I was like, oh wow, it's fantastic. So I was able to do some mussel surveys. So basically you go through the river, searching the backs, on your kind of hands and knees, wading through the water to find where the mussels were, and you'd count how many there were, what the sizes were. That kind of gives an indication of breeding, if there's a lot in the river. If they're smaller, it generally means they're younger, there's signs of breeding. If they're all really big, it kind of means they're dying out. There's not as much breeding. So surveying is a really important thing to kind of monitor how many there are, because unfortunately most of the populations are degrading. There's not as many. So that's a lot of that work on the back wall there. Is the ones on the right are the images with Jamie, who was part of the Kaikahi project, where I worked with going through and finding all these mussels. And I found out about some scientists from Niwa who were creating these vessels which housed kaakahi that couldn't be at the bottom. So the kaakahi would die if you placed them in the lake, but if you had them in a vessel on the surface, the water quality, the oxygen level is at a certain point where they can survive. So I found these really interesting in themselves, how these vessels and how we could design and make them in an artistic way, but in a practical way. So it's also, this vessel here is informed by the Māori eel trap. So it allows fish to go through it, swim through it, and all the kaakahi will be on the outside. And something really interesting with breeding with kaakahi, it requires a fish to breed, which is really interesting. So they spit their babies onto the backs of the fish, and then the fish will, host fish will travel and place them, disperse them in the lake and in the water. Which is really an interesting way for them to breed, and they haven't been able to recreate that in the labs just yet. They've been able to breed them, they can't keep them alive because of whether it's pH, whether it's not feeding them the right food, just water quality, something is off. But unfortunately we can't breed them in vitro yet. and unfortunately the funding for that has been cut, which is very, very unfortunate.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was informed, the special care is informed by that, and the design at the top is the Neko taniwha, which is the teeth of the taniwha, talking about Kaitiaki whānau and about the protection of the lake, drawing back from the imagery in our oral histories. Yeah. And all the images at the back of the wall are the insides of kaakahi that I found washed up with Jamie's help through the Aotearoa. And I just love kind of this aesthetically, just the different designs on each inside. They've got a really like unique interior, like each one is different and unique. And I think it's, yeah, I think they're really beautiful and they're blown up and like seen. Yeah. Also something I forgot to mention about this little biochar thing, which is supposed to emulate like the bed of the river and this vessel floating above the river. You can see little objects like on top of like the kind of grainy biochar, and it's, so I made some molds and they are the kaakahi, out of biochar, maltodextrin, water, and caster sugar, surprisingly. Because one thing I was also looking at was doing 3D printing with biochar, and I basically found out you can 3D print with any powder as long as you have maltodextrin, sugar, and like water, if it's a fine enough powder. And you can do the same thing, like kind of make anything solid if you have those other ingredients as well. So it's mostly like 90% biochar, a little bit of maltodextrin and sugar and water, and it makes this like hard substance, yeah. And that's pretty much the gist of it all. I think I've encapsulated most of it. I've probably forgotten stuff. Yeah.
That's all good. Wow, that's it sounds like you kind of went on like so many twists and turns with this. Like, I'm guessing it grew beyond where you started and what you imagined.
No, definitely. I think a big thing that Simon was talking about was kind of allowing myself to just find different avenues, find different, just really be led by the research, be led with what I was discovering, because I didn't even know that kaakahi existed before I started this. So I didn't know what the end product was gonna be when I started this. But I'm really happy with like what I have been able to discover, and I'm potentially like moving forward, being able to look more into kaakahi, getting funding to breed more of them would be fantastic. So we can like replenish those populations which are dying out, unfortunately.
It's such an interesting thing to sort of contemplate, the idea that like art and art making can like be so sort of integrated with like science and the actual act of trying to protect the beautiful world that we live in.
Exactly, Te Āo Māori. I definitely, totally with that sentiment, for sure. I feel like we often pigeonhole ourselves into like, I'm going to be an artist, I'm a sculptor, I'm a painter, this is what I am. I had someone ask me like the other day, what's your medium? I'm like, I don't have a medium. I like to be informed by lots of different things. And I think science and engineering and all have places within the arts. And I feel like often like the arts are the first thing to be cut away. But I think there's beautiful ways that we can integrate lots of different things and be informed by science and be informed by different practices, be informed by engineers and like create really elevated works.
And the idea that, you know, artists aren't just here to comment on or reflect or whatever, but we're also here to like act, to do,
exactly. A lot of other artists I know anyway are also activists like themselves. They want to make a difference like through their artworks, and I think that's the most powerful art, is the ones that have an impact, change a person, change the environment, change whatever, have some sort of impact and change on it.
Absolutely. What was like, I was just imagining like, was crawling through a riverbed looking for mussels the weirdest thing that you ended up doing on this, or was there?
Pretty much. I found it weird just like talking to scientists like who've never heard of me before. Like emailing them and be like, hi, I'm this art student, I really want to like make some cool artworks, can you like talk to me? It's these really kind of prestigious, like they're scientists, like this is what they like, they're in labs and like Yeah, it was kind of a surreal experience, and like these scientists actually willing to talk to me as well. Like this, like undergrad, I hadn't even finished their degree, like it was just kind of eye-opening to seeing those different perspectives and talking to a lot of different people in lots of different fields. So people who are on the ground doing the field work, people in the sciences and the academia. It's really interesting getting all those different perspectives, and I think that's what happens when you have like a kaupapa Māori methodology, when you're led by dialogue and by talking with people, not just in academia, but also community-led groups. I think it's really important to make sure you're not kind of bubbled in the academia, because often, sometimes I find that as well when I'm just full-time uni, I forget like what it's like outside, and like actually getting your hands dirty and like making change that way. I think it's really powerful and shifts your mind, I guess.
That's the downside of the way universities are organised, that we're like, oh no, well, I'm an art student and you're a science student, you know?
Exactly. I think there's so much we can learn if we do I guess the whole
talking more to each other and sort of helping each other see things in different ways. And,
exactly.
Awesome. What do you think is like the most sort of important thing, valuable thing that you're going to take forward from this project?
I think what we've just talked about, being able to like have also being less afraid to like talk to people, and because I don't know, I get, as everyone does, an imposter syndrome. Like, you shouldn't be talking to me. I'm like I don't have enough mana to like hold my own. And so I just kind of need to get out of my head in that way and just have these conversations. I know it's like with a lot of artists I find, or myself anyway, I can get quite anxious and work things up in my head, and it's like, we're all just people. We're all just like, trying to do our best, and no one really knows what they're doing, and like, that's okay. They got really philosophical, but like that's kind of what I've learned through this, is being okay to ask questions and be, as long as you come at it like really humble and like, I want to learn from you. No one knows everything, but you can be informed about things. It's the big thing about it.
And ultimately, I think both artists and scientists and probably everybody else are just genuinely really excited whenever anyone shows interest from outside. So I can imagine that was really awesome. So is there anything else that you want to cover, or should we open up for some questions?
I think it's good. I think it's a good place to leave it. If there's no questions, that's okay.
Well, if anyone has any questions for Emma, please feel free.